My wedding planner's phone rang during the ceremony. After one look at the screen, she screamed, "Everyone out now!" The officiant had just asked if anyone objected when Diane's phone started buzzing in her pocket. Our wedding planner never kept her phone on during ceremonies. She'd told us that 3 times during our planning meetings, emphasizing how unprofessional it would be. But there it was, vibrating loud enough that the first 2 rows could hear it over the string quartet. Diane's face went from annoyed to confused to absolutely terrified in the span of maybe 3 seconds. She pulled the phone out, looked at the screen, and her hands started shaking so badly I thought she might drop it. Then she looked up at me and Claire standing at the altar, looked out at our 380 guests filling the ballroom, and screamed at the top of her lungs, "Everyone out now! Get out of the building right now!" People froze. The officiant stopped mid-sentence. Claire grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. Diane started running down the center aisle toward the exit, still screaming, "This is not a drill! Everyone needs to evacuate immediately! Leave everything and get out!" The confusion lasted maybe 5 seconds before panic took over. Guests started standing up, some moving toward the exits, others looking around trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. Claire's mother stood up from the front row demanding to know what was happening. My father started yelling at Diane, asking if this was some kind of prank, but Diane wasn't stopping to explain. She'd reached the back of the ballroom and was physically pushing people toward the doors, her voice hoarse from screaming. "There's a bomb! Someone called in a bomb threat! Everyone needs to get out right now!" The word bomb cut through the confusion like a knife. Suddenly everyone was moving, rushing toward the exits in a surge that nearly trampled the elderly guests in the back rows. Claire and I stood frozen at the altar for a moment before her maid of honor grabbed both of us and started pulling us toward the side exit. The ballroom descended into chaos as 380 people tried to evacuate through doors designed for normal traffic flow. I lost track of Claire in the crowd almost immediately. 1 second her hand was in mine. The next I was being shoved forward by a mass of panicking guests, all of us trying to get out before something exploded. The hotel staff had appeared from nowhere, trying to direct traffic and keep people from getting crushed, but their voices were drowned out by screaming and the sound of heels clicking frantically against marble floors. Outside, the parking lot was filling with confused, terrified wedding guests in formal wear. Hotel guests from other events were being evacuated too, streaming out of different exits, adding to the chaos. Police cars were arriving with sirens blaring, officers trying to establish a perimeter while EMTs set up a staging area. I finally spotted Claire near the valet station, surrounded by her bridesmaids, still wearing her white dress that had cost $8,000 and taken 6 months to arrive. She saw me and started crying, not the happy tears we joked about during planning, but the kind of sobbing that comes from shock and fear. I pushed through the crowd to reach her, and we held each other while police officers shouted instructions about moving farther from the building. My best man found us a few minutes later, his face pale. "They're saying it's credible. The bomb squad is on the way. Nobody's allowed back inside until they clear the entire hotel." Claire's father appeared, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. He'd paid $120,000 for this wedding. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the band, everything. And now we were standing in a parking lot watching police tape go up around the building where we were supposed to be having the reception of our dreams. Diane found us about 20 minutes later, still shaking but more composed than when she'd started screaming in the ballroom. She pulled me aside, away from Claire and the family members clustering around us. "The call came directly to my cell," she said quietly, her voice still rough from all the screaming. "Unknown number. A man's voice. He said there was an explosive device in the ballroom and it would detonate during the ceremony. He described exactly where we were in the venue, what you were wearing, how many guests were there. He knew details nobody outside your immediate circle should know." My blood went cold. "Did he say why? Did he want money?" Diane shook her head. "He said, 'Tell the groom this is what he deserves.'" Then he hung up. I called 911 immediately, and then I just reacted. I'm sorry for the chaos, but I couldn't risk waiting to figure out if it was real. A police detective approached us before I could process what she'd said. Detective Raymond Kovac, according to his badge. He wanted to speak with me privately, and when I asked if Claire should be there too, he said, "No, just me for now." We moved to his unmarked car parked at the edge of the lot, and he asked me to sit in the back seat while he sat up front, turned around to face me. "Mr. Whitmore, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anyone in your life who would want to hurt you? Someone with a grudge? An ex-girlfriend? Someone you've had a falling out with?" I tried to think, but my brain felt like it was moving through mud. "No, I mean, I don't think so. I'm an accountant. I don't have enemies. My life is boring. Kovac wasn't satisfied with that answer. What about your fiancée, Claire? Anyone who might be upset about this wedding? Claire was a kindergarten teacher. The idea that anyone would want to hurt her was absurd. I said as much, and Kovac wrote something in his notebook. The bomber specifically mentioned you, not her. This is what he deserves. That's personal, Mr. Whitmore. That's someone who believes you've wronged them in some way. He continued asking questions while the bomb squad arrived in their tactical gear and disappeared into the hotel. I went through every significant relationship in my life, every friend I'd lost touch with, every professional disagreement at work. Nothing rose to the level of someone calling in a bomb threat to my wedding. Kovac asked about my family, and I explained that my parents were divorced but civil, that I had one sister who was currently traveling in Europe and hadn't been able to attend the wedding. He asked about Claire's family, and I said they were wonderful people who'd welcomed me without reservation. What about exes? Kovac pressed. Anyone who didn't take the breakup well? I'd had 3 serious relationships before Claire. Amanda in college, which ended when she transferred schools. Jessica for 2 years in my 20s, which ended mutually when we realized we wanted different things. And Veronica, which had ended badly, but that was 5 years ago. Tell me about Veronica, Kovac said, picking up on my hesitation. Veronica Ashford had been my girlfriend for 18 months when I was 27. We'd met at a mutual friend's party and clicked immediately. She was intense and passionate and completely different from anyone I'd dated before. The relationship had been exciting at first, then exhausting, then toxic. She'd been possessive and jealous, accusing me of cheating whenever I spent time with friends without her. The breakup had been messy. She'd shown up at my apartment crying multiple times, called me at work, sent hundreds of texts. I'd eventually had to block her number and avoid places I knew she frequented. But that was 5 years ago. She'd moved to Seattle for a job opportunity 6 months after we broke up, and I hadn't heard from her since. Kovac wrote down her name and asked if I had any way to contact her. I didn't. He said he'd look into it anyway, that they needed to follow every lead. By this time, the bomb squad had been inside for over an hour. The sun was setting, and wedding guests were starting to leave, either heading home or to nearby hotels to figure out what to do with their formal wear and nowhere to go. Claire's parents were in crisis mode, trying to salvage something from the disaster. They'd already paid for everything, and the hotel was saying they couldn't guarantee when or if guests would be allowed back inside. The food would be ruined by the time the building was cleared. The band had already started packing up their equipment that had been set up outside for cocktail hour. My mother found me standing alone near the police perimeter, staring at the hotel like I could will everything back to normal. She hugged me without saying anything, which somehow made it worse. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I'd waited 32 years to find someone like Claire, someone who made me laugh and feel safe and want to build a future. And now we were standing in a parking lot. Our wedding destroyed by someone who apparently hated me enough to threaten mass murder. The bomb squad finally emerged at 8:47 p.m., more than 3 hours after Diane had screamed for everyone to evacuate. The captain spoke with Kovac for several minutes, and I watched their body language, trying to read whether they'd found anything. Kovac approached me with an expression I couldn't decipher. They didn't find any explosive devices, he said. The entire hotel has been cleared. It was a hoax. Relief should have flooded through me, but instead I just felt numb. A hoax. Someone had called in a fake bomb threat to my wedding, terrorized 380 people, and destroyed what was supposed to be the best day of my life. For what? Can we go back inside? I asked. Kovac shook his head. The hotel is closing for the night. They need to do their own security sweep, and frankly, most of your guests have already left. I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. Claire was waiting with her parents when I walked back to where they'd been standing. Her makeup was ruined from crying, her elaborate updo was falling apart, and she looked exhausted. When I told her it was a hoax, she didn't look relieved either. She just looked broken. We never got married, she said quietly. The officiant didn't finish the ceremony. We're not married. The realization hit both of us at the same time. We'd been standing at the altar about to say our vows when Diane had started screaming. The officiant had never pronounced us husband and wife. Legally, we weren't married. All that planning, all that money, and we weren't even married. Claire's mother immediately started problem solving, talking about rescheduling, about suing someone for the costs, about finding out who did this and making them pay. But Claire and I just stood there holding hands, trying to process that our wedding day had ended with us still single. The hotel manager approached apologetically, explaining that they would refund the venue fee and work with us to reschedule once the police investigation was complete. He seemed genuinely devastated by what had happened, but his words felt hollow. Money didn't fix the humiliation of having your wedding evacuated. It didn't fix the fear that someone out there hated you enough to do this. Kovac gave me his card and said he'd be in touch as the investigation continued. They were pulling phone records for Diane's cell, trying to trace where the call had originated. He said most bomb threats were either pranks by teenagers or attempts at extortion, but the personal nature of this one suggested someone with a specific grudge. We ended up at Claire's parents' house, still in our wedding clothes, eating leftover pizza someone had ordered because nobody had eaten since breakfast. Claire's sister tried to lighten the mood by joking that at least we'd have a story to tell our grandkids, but the joke fell flat. This wasn't funny. This was traumatic. Around midnight, Claire and I finally went to what was supposed to be our honeymoon suite at a different hotel, since we couldn't get into the one where our wedding had imploded. We sat on the edge of the bed in silence, neither of us knowing what to say. Everything felt wrong. "Do you think it was Veronica?" Claire asked finally. I'd told her about my ex-girlfriends early in our relationship, including the messy ending with Veronica. Claire had never seemed bothered by it before, but now there was something in her voice I couldn't identify. "I don't know. Maybe. But it's been 5 years. Why would she do this now?" Claire started crying again. "Because you're finally happy. Because you moved on and she couldn't stand it. Because she's crazy and wants to ruin your life." I pulled her close, but she felt stiff in my arms. "This isn't your fault," I said. "Whoever did this is sick. This has nothing to do with you." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. Someone had targeted me specifically. The bomber had said, "This is what he deserves," meaning I'd done something in their eyes to warrant this response. And whatever that something was, it had destroyed Claire's wedding day too. We didn't sleep that night. We lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the hotel around us, both of us jumping at every noise. Around 3 a.m., Claire's phone started buzzing with notifications. She picked it up, and her face went pale. "Oh my God! Oh my God, no!" She handed me the phone. Social media was exploding with posts about our wedding. Guests had filmed the evacuation on their phones. Someone had posted video of Diane screaming about a bomb. Another guest had live-streamed the entire aftermath, including interviews with people describing their terror. The hashtag #DireWeddingBombHoax was trending locally, with thousands of shares and comments. Most of the comments were sympathetic, but some were cruel. People speculating about why someone would target us, suggesting we must have done something to deserve it. Others were making jokes about it being the worst wedding ever. Some were conspiracy theories about it being a publicity stunt. Our names were everywhere. Photos of Claire and me from the ceremony before the evacuation were being shared without our permission. Someone had created a meme using a photo of Claire crying in her wedding dress. Claire was sobbing now, scrolling through post after post, watching our private tragedy become public entertainment. I tried to take the phone away, but she wouldn't let go. "Everyone knows," she kept saying. "Everyone knows, and they're laughing at us." I finally got the phone away from her and turned it off. Then I turned off my own phone, which had been buzzing non-stop with messages and calls from people I hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting to know what happened, all wanting details they could share with their own networks. We were viral. Our destroyed wedding was entertainment for strangers. The next morning brought no relief. Kovac called at 7 a.m. to say they'd traced the call to a burner phone purchased with cash at a convenience store in a different city. No security footage of the purchase, no way to identify who bought it. The phone had been used once, for the bomb threat call, then destroyed. They were looking at cell tower data to try to narrow down the location when the call was made, but it was going to take time. He asked again about Veronica, whether I had any photos or contact information for mutual friends who might know where she was. I gave him everything I could remember, which wasn't much. Veronica had systematically cut off everyone who knew me after our breakup, according to friends who'd tried to maintain contact with both of us. She'd deleted all her social media accounts and refused to respond to messages. The last anyone had heard, she was working for some tech company in Seattle, but nobody knew which one or whether she was even still there. Claire's parents arrived at our hotel around 9 a.m., with coffee and pastries nobody wanted to eat. They'd been up all night fielding calls from relatives and friends, trying to explain what happened while also admitting they had no idea who was responsible or why. The hotel had confirmed they could reschedule the wedding for 3 months from now. Same venue, same vendors willing to work with us. But the idea of going through all of this again felt impossible. "What if it happens again?" Claire said. What if we reschedule and this person just does the same thing? Her father tried to reassure her that the police would find whoever was responsible before then, but we all knew that was wishful thinking. The police had almost no leads, and a perpetrator who'd been careful enough to use a burner phone and leave no evidence. My phone rang with an unknown number. I'd turned it back on to coordinate with Kovac, and now I was regretting it. I answered cautiously. "Is this David Whitmore?" A woman's voice, professional and unfamiliar. I confirmed it was, and she identified herself as Rebecca Lynn, an investigative journalist with the local news station. She wanted to interview Claire and me about the bomb threat, said they were doing a story about wedding disasters and how couples cope with trauma. I hung up on her. Within minutes, 3 more journalists called with similar requests. Claire's phone was getting the same calls. We turned them both off again, but the damage was done. We weren't just viral on social media. We were a news story now. By evening, the local news had run a segment about our wedding, complete with the video guests had posted online, and an interview with Diane explaining how she'd received the threat. They'd blurred our faces but used our names, making it easy for anyone who knew us to identify exactly who was involved. They ended the segment by asking anyone with information to contact police and showing Kovac's contact information. My employer called. The accounting firm where I worked wanted to discuss whether my personal situation was affecting my ability to perform my job. They didn't say it directly, but the implication was clear. The publicity was making them uncomfortable. They asked me to take a few weeks of unpaid leave while things settled down, which we both knew meant until the media found something else to care about. Claire's school district was more supportive, telling her to take whatever time she needed, but I could hear the stress in the principal's voice when she called. Parents were asking questions about why their children's teacher was involved in a bomb threat situation. Never mind that Claire was the victim, somehow the association alone was enough to make them nervous. We spent the next few days hiding in Claire's apartment, ignoring the doorbell when reporters showed up asking for comments. My sister Natalie cut her Europe trip short and flew home, arriving with a suitcase full of clothes and a determination to help us figure out who had done this. She'd always been the practical one in our family, the problem solver who attacked every challenge with spreadsheets and logic. She sat us down in Claire's living room and started making lists. Everyone who'd been invited to the wedding, everyone who'd known the exact date and location, everyone who might have had access to details about the ceremony timing. The list was depressingly long. We'd sent 400 invitations. The wedding had been planned for 11 months. Dozens of vendors had known the specifics. Anyone following our social media could have pieced together the information from our posts about preparations and countdowns. Natalie wasn't satisfied with vague possibilities. She started researching every significant person from my past, creating profiles with timelines and potential motives. When she got to Veronica, she spent 3 hours digging through old internet archives and professional networking sites. "She's not in Seattle anymore," Natalie said finally. "She moved back to the area 8 months ago. She's working for a software company downtown, about 15 minutes from your office." The information hit like a physical blow. Veronica was here. She'd been here for 8 months, living and working in the same city, and I'd had no idea. Claire's face went pale. Why would she move back here? I had no answer. Veronica had left specifically to get away from me, from the memories of our failed relationship. Why would she return unless she had a reason? Natalie was already looking up more information. She's not on social media at all. No Facebook, Instagram, nothing. But her company has a staff page with professional photos. She turned her laptop around to show us. The woman in the photo was definitely Veronica, but different from how I remembered her. Her hair was shorter, professional rather than the long, artistic style she'd preferred. Her smile was polished and corporate. She looked successful and composed, not at all like someone who would call in a bomb threat to an ex-boyfriend's wedding. But looks meant nothing. Kovac was interested in this new information when we called him. He said he'd follow up with Veronica, see if she had an alibi for the day of the wedding, but he cautioned us not to get our hopes up. Living in the same city wasn't proof of anything, and most people who made bomb threats didn't have obvious connections to their victims that police could easily trace. Days passed with no news. Kovac called periodically with updates that weren't really updates, still analyzing phone records, still interviewing potential witnesses, still trying to build a case. Meanwhile, our lives remained in suspended animation. We couldn't move forward with rescheduling the wedding when the threat was still unresolved. We couldn't return to normal life when everyone who knew us was treating us like fragile victims. We couldn't escape the online attention that kept finding new angles to discuss our tragedy. 2 weeks after the bombing hoax, Claire started getting weird messages. They came through Instagram DMs from an account with no profile picture and a random string of letters for a username. The first message just said, "He doesn't deserve you." Claire showed it to me, and we immediately saved screenshots and reported the account. But the account was deleted within hours, and a new one appeared the next day with a similar message. "You're making a mistake marrying him. Then, ask him about what he did." Claire was terrified. I was furious. Whoever was doing this wasn't satisfied with ruining the wedding. They were actively trying to destroy our relationship. We showed everything to Kovac, who added it to the investigation file, but admitted there was little he could do about anonymous social media messages unless they contained specific threats. The messages continued, becoming more frequent and more disturbing. "He's not who you think he is. Check his phone records from 3 years ago. Ask him why Veronica really left." That last one made my blood run cold because it suggested the messenger knew about Veronica, which meant they either were Veronica or knew her well enough to understand our history. Claire started pulling away from me, not dramatically, but I could feel it in the small ways. She took longer to respond to my texts. She found excuses not to spend the night at my apartment. She was quieter when we were together, watching me with a look I couldn't quite interpret. "I'm not hiding anything," I told her one night, when the tension became unbearable. "I don't know what these messages are talking about. Veronica and I broke up because we weren't compatible, because she was possessive, and I couldn't handle it anymore. That's the truth." Claire wanted to believe me. I could see it in her eyes, but doubt had been planted, and doubt grows in darkness. "Why would someone do this if there wasn't something to expose?" she asked. "What are they trying to make me discover?" I had no answer that satisfied either of us. Natalie suggested we hire a private investigator, someone who could dig deeper than the police investigation. She'd researched firms that specialized in cyberstalking and harassment cases. It would be expensive, but at this point, we were desperate for any kind of progress. The investigator we hired was a woman named Iris Brennan, former FBI agent turned private consultant. She listened to our story without judgment, took copies of all the messages and evidence we'd collected, and said she'd start by looking into Veronica's current life and activities. Within a week, Iris had information that complicated everything. Veronica wasn't just working in the city. She'd been promoted to a senior position at her company. She was engaged to someone named Kyle Peterson, a software engineer at the same firm. They'd been together for 2 years, living together for 1, and by all appearances, were happy and stable. "She doesn't fit the profile of someone who'd call in a bomb threat to an ex's wedding," Iris said bluntly. "She's moved on, built a new life, has no apparent obsession with you. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be unusual behavior for someone in a healthy relationship. So if it wasn't Veronica, who was it?" Iris started expanding the investigation, looking at other people from my past. Old coworkers, college acquaintances, anyone who might have had reason to hold a grudge. She found nothing significant. I'd lived a boringly normal life, the kind of life that didn't generate enemies who'd make bomb threats. Then Iris shifted her focus to Claire's past, despite Claire's protests that this had nothing to do with her. The bomber had specifically said, "This is what he deserves," but Iris pointed out that the most effective way to hurt someone was often through the people they loved. If someone wanted to destroy me, destroying my marriage before it even started would be devastatingly effective. Claire reluctantly provided names of ex-boyfriends, friends she'd lost touch with, anyone who might have felt wronged by her in some way. There had been 3 serious relationships before me. Daniel in high school, which ended when they went to different colleges. Eric for a year after college, which ended when he moved abroad for work. And Graham, which had ended 2 years before Claire and I met. "Tell me about Graham," Iris said, and I heard the same tone Kovac had used when asking about Veronica. Claire's face tightened. "It was a bad relationship. He was controlling. He didn't like my friends, didn't like when I spent time away from him. It got worse over the year we were together. He'd show up at my apartment unannounced. He'd call my phone repeatedly if I didn't answer immediately. Toward the end, he was tracking my location through my phone without my knowledge. I'd known Claire had a bad breakup before me, but I'd never pressed for details. She'd told me she wanted to leave that part of her life in the past, and I'd respected that. Now, I was learning just how bad it had been. "How did it end?" Iris asked. "I broke up with him. He didn't take it well. He'd show up at my work, at my gym, at my parents' house. He sent hundreds of texts and emails. I had to get a restraining order. Claire's voice was flat, reciting facts without emotion. The restraining order worked for a while. He stayed away for about 6 months. Then he showed up at a restaurant where I was having dinner with friends. Just sat at a table across the room watching me. When I left, he followed me to my car. I called the police and he was arrested for violating the restraining order. What happened after that? He was convicted. He served 3 months in jail and was ordered to complete a treatment program for stalking behavior. That was about 3 months before I met David. I haven't seen or heard from him since. Iris was already taking notes. What's Graham's full name? Graham Ashworth. He was a real estate agent, or he was back then. I don't know what he does now. Iris pulled out her laptop and started searching right there in Claire's living room. It took her less than 5 minutes to find information that made all of us go cold. Graham Ashworth was still a real estate agent in the area. His professional profile showed him smiling in a business suit, looking nothing like the threatening stalker Claire had described. His bio mentioned that he specialized in luxury properties and had won several industry awards. It also mentioned that he'd recently gotten engaged himself to someone named Melissa Chen, with a wedding planned for 6 months from now. He's moved on, Claire said, sounding almost relieved. He has a fiancée. He's building his own life. Why would he care about my wedding? But Iris was frowning at something on her screen. When did you send out your wedding invitations? About 4 months before the wedding, I said. So, 11 months after we got engaged. We sent save the dates earlier, but the formal invitations went out in April. Iris turned her laptop around. Graham's engagement announcement was dated May 1st, 2 weeks after our invitations would have been mailed. Could be coincidence, she said, or it could be reactive. You announce your wedding publicly, and suddenly he's engaged too. Claire shook her head. That's insane. He's been in jail, completed treatment, moved on with his life. Why would my wedding announcement trigger anything? Iris closed her laptop. People who stalk and harass often have a distorted sense of ownership over their victims. Even years later, even after they've moved on in other ways, the thought of you being truly happy with someone else, getting married, building a permanent life, could feel like a betrayal to him, like you're finalizing a rejection that he never actually accepted. The words hung in the air between us. Claire looked like she might be sick. I felt a rage building in my chest that was completely foreign to me. The idea that some man Claire had dated years ago might have terrorized hundreds of people because he couldn't handle that she'd moved on was beyond comprehension. We need to give this information to Kovac, I said. Iris agreed, but cautioned us that suspicion wasn't evidence. Graham had an alibi for the day of our wedding, according to his social media posts. He'd been at an open house showing a property with dozens of potential buyers who could verify his presence. Alibis can be arranged, Iris said. He could have had someone else make the call. He could have used technology to place the call remotely while establishing his alibi elsewhere, but proving any of that will be difficult without more evidence. She asked if she could interview people who'd known Graham during his relationship with Claire, trying to establish a pattern of behavior that might support the theory. Claire provided names of friends who'd witnessed Graham's controlling behavior and the aftermath of their breakup. Over the next week, Iris conducted interviews and compiled a disturbing profile. Graham had a history of obsessive behavior with ex-girlfriends going back to college. Claire wasn't his first victim. She was just the first one who'd actually gotten a restraining order and followed through with criminal charges. Other women had simply moved away or changed their routines to avoid him until he fixated on someone new. His engagement to Melissa appeared genuine on the surface, but when Iris spoke to people who knew them as a couple, a different picture emerged. Graham was possessive and controlling in subtle ways. He monitored Melissa's phone usage and social media. He discouraged her from spending time with friends without him. He'd even suggested she change jobs because her current workplace had too many male coworkers. Melissa herself seemed unaware that this behavior was problematic. She described Graham as protective and caring, said he just wanted what was best for her. She mentioned that he'd been stressed lately about some family issues, but wouldn't elaborate on what those issues were. Iris managed to get access to Graham's public social media profiles using a fake account. What she found was revealing. Graham had never mentioned Claire publicly, but he followed several of Claire's friends and family members. He'd liked posts about our engagement. He'd seen our wedding announcements. He knew exactly when and where our wedding was taking place, because Claire's well-meaning relatives had posted about it extensively. More disturbing, Graham had searched for and saved multiple news articles about bomb threats and wedding disasters. His browser history, which Iris obtained through methods she declined to explain fully, showed an obsessive interest in stories about relationships destroyed by outside interference. He'd been researching bomb threat laws, penalties for making false threats, and how police traced anonymous calls. "This is enough for Kovacs to get a warrant," Iris said, presenting her findings. "Graham has means, motive, and has been actively researching the exact crime that was committed. Combined with his history of stalking Claire, this builds a strong case." We turned everything over to the police. Kovacs was initially skeptical but became more interested as he reviewed Iris's documentation. He said he'd need to verify her sources and methods, make sure everything was obtained legally, but there was enough here to justify a deeper investigation into Graham. Then things accelerated rapidly. The same day we gave Kovacs the information about Graham, Claire received another anonymous message. This one was different from the others. Instead of vague accusations about me, it contained specific details about Claire's past relationship with Graham. "Remember what he said the last time you saw him? He promised you'd regret leaving him. He said he'd make sure you never got your happy ending. He's keeping that promise." Claire hadn't told me about that final encounter with Graham. She'd minimized it, said the restraining order had resolved things. Now, with the message in front of us, she admitted the truth. The day he violated the restraining order, when the police arrested him, he was screaming at me in the parking lot. He said I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that no one would ever love me the way he did, that if he couldn't have me, he'd make sure I never got to be happy with anyone else. I thought it was just anger. I didn't think he meant it literally. The message continued. "He's planning something worse for your rescheduled wedding. The first time was just a warning. Next time he won't call it in ahead of time." Claire was shaking, reading the words over and over. "Who is sending these? Why are they telling us this now?" I called Kovacs immediately, forwarding the message. He said they were already moving on getting a warrant for Graham's home and electronics. This message, with its specific threat about future violence, gave them additional justification. The warrant was executed 2 days later. Graham was at work when police arrived at his house with a search team. They seized his computer, his phone, and several prepaid cell phones they found in a drawer in his home office. Melissa was home and called Graham in a panic, which he later described in court testimony as the moment he knew everything was falling apart. Graham was brought in for questioning. He initially denied everything, said he barely remembered Claire, hadn't thought about her in years, was happily engaged and planning his own wedding. But when confronted with his browser history and the burner phones, his story started to crumble. The forensic analysis of Graham's electronics revealed everything. He'd been monitoring Claire's social media obsessively for years, using fake accounts and specialized software to track her posts, even when she thought her privacy settings were secure. He'd known about our relationship from the first time Claire posted a photo of us together. He'd watched our relationship develop, saved every announcement, every milestone photo, every indication that Claire was building a life without him. The burner phones matched the model used to make the bomb threat call. One of them had been activated the day before our wedding and deactivated the day after. Cell tower data placed that phone in the vicinity of our wedding venue on the day of the ceremony, during the exact window when the threat call was made. Graham's computer contained drafted messages that matched the anonymous messages Claire had been receiving. Some had been sent, others were still in draft form, waiting for the right moment to deploy. He'd been carefully orchestrating a psychological campaign designed to destroy our relationship, make Claire doubt me, isolate her from her support system. One file on his computer was titled Justice. Inside were detailed plans for our wedding day. He'd researched the venue, knew the layout, had identified entry and exit points. The document outlined his plan to call in the bomb threat at the exact moment of our vows, maximizing the emotional impact and humiliation. There were notes about timing, about making sure the threat seemed credible enough that police would respond seriously, about ensuring the wedding would be completely destroyed. But more terrifying were the files labeled Wedding 2 and Wedding 3. These contained plans for escalating attacks if we attempted to reschedule. The second plan involved actually placing a fake device that would be found during a security sweep, forcing an evacuation and potentially leading to criminal charges against us for negligence. The third plan was even more sinister, involving threats against specific guests to make people afraid to attend any future wedding we might plan. Graham had thought of everything. He'd planned to systematically destroy any possibility of Claire and me getting married, making it impossible for us to have the happy ending he believed she didn't deserve. Confronted with this evidence, Graham finally broke down and confessed, not because he felt remorse, but because he wanted us to understand his reasoning. "She left me," he told Kovacs during the interrogation that was later played at trial. "After everything I did for her, After how much I loved her, she just left. Like I meant nothing. Like our relationship was nothing. She didn't just leave. She got a restraining order. She had me arrested. She treated me like I was some kind of criminal when all I did was love her too much. Kovac asked about the bomb threat, and Graham's response showed no recognition of the severity of what he'd done. It was just a phone call. Nobody was actually in danger. I just wanted them to know what it felt like to have something important taken away, to have a moment they'd planned for completely destroyed. Claire took away our future. I took away hers. It's fair. When asked about the messages to Claire and the plans for future attacks, Graham became agitated. She needed to understand that she made a mistake. David isn't right for her. I know her better than anyone. I know what she needs. She'll realize eventually that we're supposed to be together. This was all just to help her see the truth. The psychology evaluation ordered by the court diagnosed Graham with several conditions including obsessive love disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. He genuinely believed that his love for Claire entitled him to control her life, that her rejection of him was irrational and needed to be corrected. He saw nothing wrong with his actions, viewed them as justified responses to what he perceived as Claire's betrayal. Melissa broke off her engagement to Graham within days of his arrest. She gave an interview to the same journalist who'd tried to interview us, describing how she'd been blind to the warning signs of his controlling behavior. She'd thought his attentiveness was romantic. She'd believed his explanations about wanting to protect her. She hadn't realized she was dating a man who was still obsessed with his ex-girlfriend from years ago. Graham was charged with making false bomb threats, stalking, harassment, and several other crimes related to the electronic surveillance and planned future attacks. His lawyer tried to argue diminished capacity due to mental illness, but the prosecution successfully demonstrated that Graham had been methodical and calculating in his actions, showing clear understanding of right and wrong even if his moral compass was twisted. The trial was emotionally brutal. Claire had to testify about their relationship, about the controlling behavior she'd experienced, about the fear she felt when he violated the restraining order. She had to read aloud the messages he'd sent, the threats he'd made, the promises to ensure she'd never be happy. I testified about the bomb threat, about the destruction of our wedding day, about the weeks of terror and suspicion that followed. Diane testified about receiving the call, about the specific details Graham had known, about her decision to evacuate immediately. Other victims came forward during the trial, women Graham had dated before Claire who'd experienced similar controlling behavior but hadn't reported it. They described his pattern of love bombing followed by possessiveness, his inability to accept rejection, his tendency to blame them for his own actions. The pattern was clear and well established. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Graham showed no emotion when the verdicts were read, just stared straight ahead like he couldn't comprehend that the world didn't agree with his twisted logic. Sentencing came 2 months later. The judge was unsparing in her condemnation of Graham's actions. She noted that he'd terrorized hundreds of innocent people, destroyed a couple's wedding day, and planned even worse attacks for the future. She emphasized that his lack of remorse and continued belief that his actions were justified showed he remained a danger to Claire and to anyone else who might reject him romantically. Graham was sentenced to 8 years in prison, followed by 15 years of supervised probation with strict conditions including mandatory therapy, no contact with Claire or me, and restrictions on internet usage and access to technology. Claire and I sat in the courtroom holding hands as the sentence was read. It felt simultaneously like justice and like not nearly enough. 8 years couldn't undo the trauma of what we'd experienced. 15 years of probation couldn't guarantee Graham wouldn't find new ways to hurt us once he was released. But it was something. It was acknowledgement that what he'd done was serious and wrong and deserved severe consequences. After the sentencing, we stood on the courthouse steps surrounded by our families and the few friends who'd stuck with us through everything. Journalists shouted questions that we didn't answer. Claire's hand was tight in mine, both of us exhausted but also feeling something like relief. Kovac approached us before we could leave. I wanted you to know that we're implementing new protocols based on this case. Better systems for tracking and investigating threats against couples getting married. Training for wedding vendors and venues on security awareness. What happened to you was terrible, but the response might help protect other people in the future. It was small comfort, but it was something. Our tragedy might prevent similar tragedies for others. We rescheduled the wedding for 6 months after the trial, giving ourselves time to heal and also ensuring Graham was securely in prison before we tried again. The second ceremony was small, just 30 people at Claire's parents' house, with security that included off-duty police officers and a strict no-phones policy. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, there was a moment of collective breath-holding before he smiled and moved on to the vows. This time, we made it through. This time, we were actually married. The reception was quiet and intimate, nothing like the elaborate celebration we'd originally planned. But it was ours, untainted by fear or violence or the shadow of someone else's obsession. When we danced our first dance as husband and wife, Claire cried, but they were happy tears, mixed with relief and release of tension we'd been carrying for almost a year. We never forgot what Graham did, but we refused to let it define us. We went to therapy, individually and as a couple, working through the trauma and learning how to trust again. Claire had nightmares for months where Graham appeared at our new wedding, where the evacuation happened again, where his threats escalated into actual violence. I had my own nightmares about not being able to protect her, about failing to see the danger before it destroyed everything. But slowly, with time and support and the knowledge that Graham was locked away, we began to rebuild. We bought a house with a security system that Claire insisted on testing personally. We changed our social media privacy settings and were more careful about what information we shared publicly. We learned to balance caution with the desire to live normal lives without constant fear. Melissa reached out to us a year after Graham's sentencing. She wanted to apologize for not seeing who Graham really was, for contributing unknowingly to his obsession by being with him. Claire met with her for coffee and came home saying they'd both cried and bonded over their shared experience of being targeted by the same predator. Melissa had started a support group for people who'd experienced stalking by romantic partners, and she asked if we'd be willing to speak at one of their meetings. We agreed, and found that sharing our story with others who'd lived through similar trauma was healing in unexpected ways. 3 years after our destroyed wedding, Claire got pregnant with our first child. The pregnancy was complicated by anxiety. Claire constantly worried that Graham would somehow find out, would target our child as a new way to hurt her. But our daughter was born healthy and perfect, and holding her for the first time, I saw Claire's face transform, joy replacing fear, hope replacing trauma. We named her Sophia, which means wisdom, because surviving what we'd been through had taught us things we wished we'd never had to learn, but were grateful to know. We learned that evil can come from unexpected places, that love can become twisted into something dark and dangerous, that the justice system doesn't always move fast enough to prevent harm. But we also learned that we were stronger than we thought, that our love could survive even when someone actively tried to destroy it, that healing was possible even from deep trauma. Graham became eligible for parole after serving 5 years, having earned time off for good behavior in prison. We attended the parole hearing with victim impact statements we'd prepared carefully, describing the lasting effects of his actions on our lives. The parole board denied his release, noting his continued lack of genuine remorse and his minimization of the harm he'd caused. He'd served the full 8 years. When he was finally released, we'd been married for 9 years. We had 2 children, a son named Lucas born 2 years after Sophia. We'd built careers and a home and a life that was solid and good and ours. We knew Graham was out there somewhere, subject to his probation conditions and required to stay away from us, but we refused to let the knowledge paralyze us. We'd already given him too much of our lives. We weren't going to give him any more. The anniversary of our destroyed wedding became a private day of reflection for us. Not a celebration, but an acknowledgement of what we'd survived and how far we'd come. We'd take the day off work, hire a babysitter, and spend it together talking about the fear we'd felt, the pain we'd endured, and the strength we'd found in each other. Then we'd go home to our children and our normal life, grateful for the boring everyday moments that Graham had tried to steal from us. 5 years after Graham's release from prison, Kovac called with news. Graham had been arrested again for violating his probation by contacting another ex-girlfriend who'd broken up with him before he'd even met Claire. He'd used fake social media accounts to monitor her life, had sent anonymous messages trying to sabotage her new relationship, had shown he'd learned nothing from 8 years in prison about boundaries and consent and the rights of others to live their lives without his interference. This time, the sentence would be longer. This time, the judge recognized Graham as exactly what he was, a serial stalker who would never stop targeting women who rejected him unless he was permanently removed from society. This time, there would be no parole eligibility, no early release for good behavior. Graham would spend the next 20 years in prison, likely the rest of his active life given his age and health issues, that had developed during his first incarceration. Claire and I watched the news report about Graham's rearrest with our children playing in the next room, their laughter a sharp contrast to the serious faces of the reporters describing Graham's crimes. Claire squeezed my hand, and I saw in her eyes what I was feeling. Relief, mixed with sadness, that it had taken multiple victims and multiple arrests before the system finally recognized Graham as the permanent threat he was. "I'm sorry you went through that," Sophia said from the doorway, making us both jump. She was 7 now, old enough to understand some of what had happened, even though we'd tried to shield her from the details. "I'm sorry someone tried to hurt you." Claire pulled our daughter close and kissed her head. "Bad things happen sometimes, even to good people. But the important thing is that we got through it together, and we made sure that person couldn't hurt anyone else anymore. That's what matters." Later that night, after the kids were in bed, Claire and I sat on our back porch watching the sunset. We didn't need to talk about Graham or the trial or any of it. We'd said everything that needed to be said over the years. Instead, we sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, breathing in sync, alive and together, despite someone's best efforts to destroy us. The destroyed wedding had been the worst day of our lives, but it had also revealed something important, that our relationship was strong enough to survive anything, that we were willing to fight for each other through trauma and fear and public humiliation. Graham had tried to break us. Instead, he'd proven that we were unbreakable. 10 years after, that phone call during our ceremony, I still sometimes jolted awake at night thinking about Diane's scream, about the panic, about coming so close to losing Claire before our life together even officially started. But then I'd roll over and see her sleeping beside me, alive and safe and mine, and the fear would fade. We'd won, not just in court, but in every way that mattered. We'd built the life Graham tried to steal, raised children he'd wanted to prevent from existing, found happiness he'd been determined to destroy. And we'd done it not by forgetting what happened, but by refusing to let it define us. Our story became one we told our children when they were old enough, not to scare them, but to teach them about resilience and justice and the importance of believing victims when they speak up about dangerous people. We told them how their mother's courage in getting that restraining order years before we met had created a paper trail that eventually helped convict Graham. We told them how sometimes doing the right thing means standing up even when people don't believe you, even when the system moves slowly, even when the person hurting you seems charming to everyone else. We told them that love isn't about control or possession, but about respect and trust and wanting the other person to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include you. And on the anniversary of what should have been our wedding day, we'd celebrate quietly with the family we'd built despite everything. We'd raise a glass to Diane, who'd screamed, "Everyone out now," and saved us from hours of uncertainty if the threat had been discovered differently. We'd think about Iris, whose investigation had cracked the case. We'd remember Kovac, who'd taken the threat seriously when he could have dismissed it as a prank. We'd acknowledge all the people who'd helped us survive and find justice. Then we'd turn to each other and renew the vows we'd finally gotten to say at our small second ceremony, the promises that had been interrupted by Graham's evil but ultimately strengthened by surviving it. For better or worse, in sickness and health, in terror and peace. We'd meant every word then. We meant them even more now, having lived through the worst and come out the other side together. The destroyed wedding became our origin story, the trial by fire that proved our relationship was real and lasting and worth fighting for. And when our children asked if we'd change anything if we could go back, knowing what we knew now, we'd answer honestly, we'd change Graham's existence, but we wouldn't change what his actions revealed about our own strength, our love's resilience, and our capacity to build a beautiful life, even on the foundation of trauma. That was the gift we'd never asked for but learned to treasure anyway. The absolute certainty that nothing could break us because we'd already survived the worst someone could throw at us, and we'd survived it together. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.